Good morning. Today's May 11, 2014. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers or people who serve in the capacity of a mother out there today. We thank you for your service, and we know that God will richly reward you for all that you do. We couldn't be who we are without all the things you do for us. Today we're going to be talking about Acts 27, almost to the end of Acts. Paul sails for Rome. So in Acts 27, Paul was put on a ship to sail for Rome, and the ship doesn't quite get there. All right, so let's see. Let's go ahead and grab a marker. And yes, boom, here it is. All right, so we set sail, we go through, he describes all the places we go, we work our way through, and it's basically, they make it as far as Fair Havens. We're going to read in the story, and Paul says, stop, cease, and desist. And instead, they go probably more like this, and eventually they're going to crash on Malta. Okay, and so that's kind of the way this ill-fated trip is about to go, just so you understand. They, of course, are trying to make it to Rome, which is up here in Italy. Okay, so as Amy read for us in verse 1, when it was decided they should set sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some of the prisoners to a centurion of Augustan cohort, I'm doing great, named Julius. And embarking in a ship, they were able to set sail and go on. So basically, they Paul says, pastor and painting skills displayed once again. Yes, my painting skills are probably not there. All right, so basically, when they go through and they're going to jump on the ship and take off, in the Roman Empire, there was a system by which you could transport goods or soldiers or prisoners from place to place, and there were some set fees that were charged and they charged back to the Roman government. And so this is what they're doing. And so they go and they look for a ship, and and if, by the way, if anybody refused, it's kind of one of those things, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You can get a not so great, but some sort of fee from the Roman government for carrying people and so forth, and you get something, or I'll just take your ship, and we'll do it anyway, if you all follow my point. So they tend to agree. Okay. So anyway, so they went through, and they obviously, as they're kind of going through, they go through a number of the different cities, which Amy had read for us. Thank you. And it mentions in verse 3 that Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. Okay? Putting out to sea, they sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So they're trying then to go through, and it's very late in the season when the storms often come, and it's getting to be dangerous as they're moving along. Verse 5, when they moved along, sailed across the open sea along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myria and Lycia. And the centurion fought a ship of Alexandria, so it's like an Egyptian ship, sailing for Italy, and put us on board. Sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Sindus, and the wind did not allow us to go further. We sailed under the lee of Crete off of Salmone. Coasting along with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. So at this point, this is where Paul was saying, okay, look, this is bad. Okay, we've taken too much time. Verse 9, so much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over. Paul advised them, saying, sirs, I perceive the voyage will be with much injury and loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. So if you have a ship that's heavily laden with cargo, and you're sailing along, and you come into deep seas, I should say, tall seas, that are crashing over the side because the ship is so heavily laden, one of the techniques is to lighten up the boat. It also is good so that if you come across some rocks, you're, first of all, less likely to hit the rocks at all, and second, you have less mass so that hopefully you won't do as much damage. So you hopefully will bounce over top of the rocks or at least scrape them over or whatever, and go forth from there. So the cargo is one of the first things that you would then would jettison, obviously, to go through and lighten the load, as it were. Verse 11, but the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and to spend the winter there. So we don't know why the harbor is not exactly suitable. A good guess is that there are probably temporary areas out in the harbor where you can anchor temporarily, but to tie up for the winter and actually tie up near a dock or some other thing that's a little more permanent, there simply weren't locations that were suitable for there. And perhaps there are other trouble with, with it was just too crowded. Or maybe it was because the winds, of course, came through and they didn't provide a good shelter for them, whichever it was. But nevertheless, they make the decision then to go. I think Paul would have argued to go backwards. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called a northeaster, struck down from the land. So I find it interesting that this idea, the winds that come across the United States traditionally blow from west to east in most parts of the country, not all, but most. And then occasionally they will hook into a low pressure zone and curve back down from the northeast. And so you get, particularly up in New England and in the Great Lakes regions, and there's other areas as well, what we call a nor'easter. And it's simply that the winds that should be going from west to east have now hooked around. And generally that means there's going to be tremendous wind, rain, and it can be related to something like a tropical storm or even worse. Obviously, I'm saying could be coming through the area there. And so it's fascinating to me that the exact same term here we see 2,000 years ago, a nor'easter, is used as a term that we can kind of relate to even today. So the nor'easter struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. Now, the ship's boat is going to be, it's bigger than a lifeboat, but there's only going to probably be one. No offense, but they didn't carry lifeboats for all passengers on board, nor did they have life preservers for that matter. But the ship's boat is kind of, if you will, we would use the word, it's bigger than a dinghy, but you know what I'm saying, but it's the small boat that's used when if you have to anchor and you can't get in close to land, then that's the piece that you would send in from there. So we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat, and after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. So there are a couple of things that they're probably doing here. They may have been worried that the hull was flexing back and forth, and so they often have large ropes and tacking there. They may have used a ship boat to go out and put lines underneath the boat and then come up together and then cinch them using some of the winches to tighten them, to help tighten the hull of the boat and help provide support, kind of holding it all together because it's flexing too much in the waves and they're concerned about it. And so that's the use supports to undergird the ship is probably what that refers to. Then fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, which are a series of rocks, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. This is what we talked about. And the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. They're at desperate points here. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay upon us. And of course, this is Luke writing. This is his famous understatement. His no small means really big. When no small tempest lay upon us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for some time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should not have listened to me, and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." And Amy, I hope that you let me tell the story here. We were talking about, I see pain in your future. That was the one I was laughing about earlier. This is Paul back, of course, when he sees the whole thing. Oh, yes. So there was a spot when we were, and I may get this slightly wrong, but this is the way I remember it. We were leaving Dallas. We were packing the last, I think it was either the first or second U-Haul truck. We took two up from there. I think actually it's the first now that I recall. And we, the U-Haul truck has been packed pretty tall, but there's still some space at the top, and we're trying to get a few more things up at the top. And I think it could have been, was it a ladder? Was that? Yeah, no, was it a ladder you were trying to throw up there, or something long and flat? And there you go. Broom, okay, broom maybe, could have been. I think it was heavier than a broom, but could have been. Something anyway. Yeah, okay, so anyway, so Amy, she's on the back of the truck, and then on the back of the truck, she's standing on the back, and then she's kind of precariously standing on something, as I recall, on the back of the truck. So I don't know, maybe she's 4 feet above the ground level, and she's throwing something up, and it goes up in there at the top, and it slides back down, and she reaches far out, and she grabs it, and she throws it up again, and it comes back out, and she's about to go a third time, and I look at her, right, and I look at her and say, Aim, I see pain in your future. No, she didn't, because she laughed and stopped, and I'm so proud of her. But I was just seeing her balance precariously, throwing whatever it was up in there and back and throwing up and back, and I'm like, this is gonna be bad. So this is Paul. He's like, I see how this is gonna end. I don't have to be a prophet to see how this ship, this is not, I'm not a master shipwright. I'm not a pilot. I'm not a ship owner, but I'm going to tell you this one's bad. Okay. It's just not going to work out well. All right. So this is kind of the whole logistics, that he's like, this is not going to end up well. And he sees it coming. And, some of you might know the term from movies, of a slow moving, train crash that you see it coming in the movie and it just keeps going. And it's like, it's going to happen, but it's just kind of slow motion and like, there it goes. Or perhaps some of you may have experienced it in person. Maybe you've been, the best ones in my opinion are car crashes that you're involved in on ice. Have you ever done that before where you're sliding at like 7 miles an hour, but you can't stop the car and it's not that fast, but you just, and yeah, it is slow motion, but the car, and it's like, here it goes. And there's just like, and you can just, and it's like this agonizingly long time. You're just sort of waiting for the crunch. And so if you kind of picture back to my children's sermon, if you imagine that kid upside down where the bike is flipping over and it's like, well, here it comes. At that point, there was nothing. I picked that picture because there was no chance of recovery at that point. He was already bike over boy, if you follow my point. He was upside down, going down, right? And there's nothing you can do. And this is where Paul is like, I am sure it's there. And so what does he do? And so he says, yeah, men, you should have listened to me when we not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet, so he's like, okay, you should listen to me, but you didn't. But so what does he do here? He actually encourages them here. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. So he's taken a moment here to encourage them, even though they're in the middle of the situation. I mean, he does give them a little dig there. You really should listen to me, but then he moves on. But it's okay. But he tries to encourage them with what he can. So when the 14th night had come, as we're being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. Okay, so how do they take a sounding? Paul, do you know this? How would they figure out how deep the water is? They turn on their Hummingbird sonar and watch they turn on the depth finder, right? Is that they there you go. That's what they use, right? Yeah, they grab a big heavy weight and tie it to a rope and drop it overboard, and they count how much rope goes down. They turn on the depth finder, right? Poof, there you go. Okay, so they took a sounding, that's what that means, and found 20 fathoms, okay? A little further, they took a sounding and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come, okay? Line, not rope, land, lever. Oh, sorry, line. Okay, not rope. Thanks. Appreciate that, Paul. All right. So there you go. Let down a line attached to a weight as a depth finder. All right. And verse 30. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the sailors, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. So what's going to happen here is the sailors are going to leave them stranded out there, and the sailors are going to take the ships, take the boat, and they're going to make off for the land and leave them all too far out from land to be able to make it, right? And no offense, they're probably not coming back. They're not going to be magnanimous and go, let's go back out in the storm and go save them. And the ship eventually will break up too far from land and so forth. So that's what Paul says there. Now, I will confess, the soldiers, they wanted to make a point, I guess. I think this is perhaps a tad strong. But anyway, so they cut away the ropes to the shipboat and let it go. It's like, wow, okay. Maybe you should just tell them to come back or, whatever. But anyway. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense without food, and having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish ahead of you. Now, is it true that none of them had had a single bite for 14 days? Probably not. Luke's probably exaggerating here a little bit. But what he's saying is they essentially have not eaten a solid meal. Some of them are probably seasick. They're all sick with fear, for sure. And so they had essentially very little or almost no food for all this whole time. Verse 35, and when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God. In the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. So this is very interesting. He encourages them, you know what? There's no point in saving the food, right? And there's no point, you know what I'm saying, and so forth. And I've actually been in not anything this tragic, but I've been in a few trial situations where, a few things are kind of like this, and people looked at me and said, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to eat lunch because I've got time and I've got food right now. So I'm going to eat lunch. That's my plan. Hey, I'm a hobbit. What do you want? So anyway, so I'm going to eat lunch. All right. So he goes and he eats. Very practical kind of thing here that he does. And by him taking the lead and taking example, and he blessing everybody and giving thanks to God, breaks bread, and then passes it out and says, okay, let's go ahead and let's eat. And he begins eating himself first. He leads by example. We're going to need some strength to get through this, but we're going to get through it. This is the most important thing you can do right now is to quit worrying and eat. Okay? Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea, the last of the cargo. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, in which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. They hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was, they were all brought safely to land. So I got a couple of notes for you from this particular passage, and I think I've got 5 for you to jot down in your journal. And let's start with number 1. Okay? So you could say that sometimes you can see pain coming, but there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes you can see pain coming, but there's nothing you can do about it. This is going to happen in your life sometimes, guys. Now, let me just be clear. There are times when, people are doom and gloom, and every situation that's out there they really believe is going to turn out, bad and poorly. I think that's wrong. Okay, because anything could turn out poorly and bad, but at the same time, there are times when you're pretty confident. You're pretty confident that there's going to be a problem. There's going to be pain in our future, and it's going to be one of those things that's going to obviously result in loss of life, loss of money, loss of something. I tend to use terms, or I try to use terms like I would be concerned. You might not want to do that. That may not be the best course of action. I can't say for sure how things are going to turn out. And to be perfectly blunt, there have been some course of action that I have been really pretty confident were going to end up disastrously that in fact have turned out okay. We as pastors have a silly phrase we say sometimes. I'm not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet, and I work for a non-profit. So, I may not know all the answers, if you follow my point. So, there you go. There you go. All right. We're rafting the South Fork of the Flathead River. Yeah, you almost bought it that time, Paul. All right. There you go. All right. So, number 2. In those times, pray and make what practical preparations you can. In those times, pray and make what practical preparations you can. Obviously, you should start with prayer. Prayer not only for for safety, but prayer for wisdom. Okay, God, if this is going to happen, what should I do? Okay, God, if this is going to happen, help me to be calm and to keep others calm around me. It's interesting. I really don't like flying. I really don't, and it's one of those things that I do, but I don't like doing it. And it's one of those things I always think about plane crashes and those kinds of things. But it's interesting for, the plane crashes that have occurred in the United States, ones that are, that we've kind of got statistics for, there's actually a lot of survivability, believe it or not. A lot of people live through plane crashes, crazy stuff, but they do, not all, but there's a fair number. And the interesting part, they call it the golden minute. The golden minute is the 1 minute after the plane crash. And that's the minute to get out before a fire breaks out or other things are going on. And so being calmly prepared to calmly and quickly exit the aircraft in that 1 minute, to get off of there is actually the most important thing you can do. So there's not a darned thing you can do while the plane's in the air. No offense, other than pray. It's the only thing you can do that's constructive, and then stay calm. So pray and take what practical preparations you can. Sorry to use this as an example for those of you that hate airline travel, but I'll just say, if you're the type person that sleeps on the aircraft, you might want to sleep with your shoes on. Because if there's a lot of broken glass and rubble and you have to run in a hurry, having your shoes on can really help. Sounds like a silly thing, but it's actually a very good idea. You follow? These are practical types of things. Okay, that could be important. All right? So Paul is looking for practical things. I hope you can see that, in that he prays and he encourages the people through his prayer, the things that are doing, the things that are there, and his relationship with that. And then he talks about, let's eat. Who can eat at a time like this? Well, now's as good a time as any. Okay, now is a pretty good time for us to eat something, so hopefully you can have some strength. And believe it or not, eating and drinking actually can help calm you down some, which is probably one of the things he was trying to do. Number 3, if God leads you, step out in leadership to help as many others as will follow you. Now, not everybody's going to follow you, and this isn't for everybody in every situation. I'm not trained as an airline pilot. I'm not sure that, I'm going to run to the front and go try to take controls of the airline, if you follow my point, right? And so forth. But if nobody else is doing it, better to have somebody's hands on the controls. I'm sure of that. I'm sure I'm better than no one. I'll go with that one. That's one of the things. Okay? So in this case, Paul steps up out of leadership. Now, ironically, he's a prisoner. Okay? This is the funny part about the whole thing. But by the point when he makes his prediction, and then the prediction comes true, and he speaks calmly again, and speaks through this, and it's probably one of the reasons why he mentions the fact to remind them that, okay, I told you before, and you didn't listen to me last time. I hope you listen to me this time, is basically what he's saying. Okay? So if God leads you in the situation, step out in leadership to help as many others as will follow you. And there will always be multiple. I'm always astounded whenever situations arise, because they're just like, really very different. 2 or 3 very different leaders will often emerge, right? And you have to you really, really be prayerful about whether you need to calmly and assertively assert yourself as one of the leaders, or whether you want to give your ideas and then back off and see if your ideas are going to be ignored or followed. Okay? So interesting is to kind of watch your way through that. So as a quick comment on this, I was at a youth camp one time. It's called Centrifuge. And they had this really great exercise they would do where, and bear in mind, everybody in our group, everybody who's there, and the 25 people who are in our group who are going through this obstacle course, it's a collective group obstacle course, everybody who's there is a church leader, youth leader, pastor, assistant pastor, associate pastor, music pastor, whatever. Everybody's a leader, okay? And so it was total and complete chaos as we went to the various types of things. And some of you are familiar with some of these exercises where they have a number of posts into the ground and you lay boards across them and you have to coordinate how to go through and get through the whole thing. And by the way, it's timed to increase the tension, right? And I mean, we had like 4 major alpha type personalities who were all screaming at each other. Bear in mind, these are all godly people who are all screaming at each other, trying to take control of the situation in different ways. And I just stood off to the side. And after we had total, absolute failure, my dear friend Lee Kearns looks at the group and says, "May I speak?" And the whole group, out of frustration, says, "Sure, what?" And he said, "I nominate Carl Connor to lead this entire group." And I'm looking at him like, I'm going to kill you. And he's like, "I think Carl has some pretty good ideas, and I'd recommend that you listen to him," right? And I had a really rough morning that morning, some other things that were going on. I was actually dealing with kind of redealing with the death of my mother, interestingly enough, and I was just broken. And I didn't have anything left emotionally, and the only thing I could offer up was what God had filled me with. And so I looked around the group, and our next obstacle was to get up this big, huge, wall with some ropes, and we had to work together as a team. And I looked at it, and I said, guys, I know the position we need to start in. Everybody circle up and grab a hand. And I led us all in prayer. And there were pastors crying over the fact that they realized that through their pride of wanting to lead, they were not able to listen to practical ideas. We prayed, we talked through it, we found a way over the wall, and we flew over it. You understand? And I didn't have anything left in me to lead. I got to be honest, I didn't have the answer to get over the wall, but I knew it started in prayer. In that case, I stepped out in leadership because it's what God called me to do. But the most important part was unifying the group. And then we could then work forward and find an answer. To be perfectly blunt, there were probably 3 or 4 different ways, I thought about it later, we could have gotten over the wall, any one of which would have worked, provided we worked in unity. And the unity was the really important part. Number 4, remember that God is in control. Remember that no matter what happens, and with all due respect, even including you all dying in the situation, God is in control. The situation will work out, and God is in control. Okay? And that is hard to accept when the outcome is not the one we want. But remember, no matter what happens, God is in control, and he will catch you, even if it's in death. Number 5, watch for ways that God may be opening a door for this situation to be used for his glory. Watch for ways that God may be opening a door for this situation to be used for his glory. Bear in mind, the desired outcome is not what you want. The desired outcome is what brings God the most glory. And if you catch a little scent of the spiritual sense of the conversation, if you catch a little sight of what the situation looks like in the spiritual realm, if you can just see with God's eyes for a moment, you might be able to see, oh, we all thought the answer was A, but it's really B. That's what this is all about. And it's not about what I thought it was about. Us getting over that wall that day was not about getting over the wall. It was about us unifying together, and in retrospect, I think it was about some of the senior pastors that had been participating with us having an opportunity to realize that they need to listen to those that are around them. It's the same way with us guys. The situation is very often not about what it seems to be about. So that brings us to the question of the week, which is, what do I do when I see the storm coming? What do I do when I see the storm coming? Guys, you're going to have storms. You're going to have pain. Things are going to happen. Think now, what are you going to do when that day comes? And I know God will see you through. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are with us. You guide us, even when things go wrong. Even when the ship we were going on cracks apart and wrecks. God, we know you are here, and we thank you that you are with us these days. I ask you to guide us and give us courage to see your hand at work around us. May the glory go to your Son. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.